So we should probably talk about John Boyega. John Boyega is an actor who's British and was in The Force Awakens and all of the new Star Wars trilogy. John Boyega started his career off in this amazing film called Attack the Block, where he was the starring leading man. John Boyega is a hugely talented, incredibly wonderful, charismatic actor. And John Boyega just accused the Star Wars fans of racism. Is he right? I'm going to give you my thoughts now.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Okay, first thing to say here, and first thing to preface here, is that there's two different conversations to be had. We have the viewpoint of the conversation about the fans, and we have the viewpoint about the corporate. The two things are very, very different. So we have the corporate perspective, which is what I'm going to talk about first. And I happen to think in that sense, John Boyega is absolutely correct. He came out recently and said that there's no real, I'm paraphrasing here, there's no real narrative when it comes to characters of color. And there's no real nuance to their storylines, much like his character of Finn. Now, for me, that's a corporate issue. That is a massive corporate issue. That comes about from a couple of things. The first thing is the storyline. The storyline completely sidelined John Boyega for the second and the third film. Now, that is not really an issue to do with racism per se. That's a storytelling issue, which unfortunately a certain director, this guy, has a lot to answer for. That's nothing to do with corporate racism. However, the marketing standpoint does have something to do with the whole racism issue. And this is not a new thing. This is not a thing that's just popped out of the woodwork. This has been going on since the beginning of film. There's certain actors who are seen as charismatic and black or Asian, and they are put in the forefront of the arena. They're given whatever stories they like to tell. Will Smith, Eddie Murphy back in the day. Right now, John David Washington, getting a lot of storylines and a lot of characters that are very rich. And I think in that sense, John Boyega is completely correct. There is a serious lack of storytelling skills when it comes to characters of color, whether it be female, male, or whatever gender. The whole issue here is storytelling and how characters, especially characters of color, are portrayed on screen. So I totally agree with John Boyega in respects to the corporate side of things. Now, on top of that, there's a marketing, which, if you remember correctly, he was sidelined for the Chinese marketing of the film. And that is a completely corporate issue to do with Disney and how they present their characters of color, especially black characters of color. This is not subjective. This is absolutely objective. If you look at the marketing for the film in Italy and in China, there was black characters that were reduced on screen. So that's factual. However, when it comes to the fan perspective, which unfortunately John put his foot in the proverbial shit with this, because the fans are not racist. I was a massive Star Wars fan. I grew up loving Star Wars. And if you look at my videos on the channel, you'll see that I have done many videos on Star Wars, kind of proclaiming that it's dead. And I'm right, Star Wars is completely dead. Now, many people think there's going to be this massive comeback, but it's not going to happen. Think about how many franchises over the years, over the many, many years that we've been on this wonderful planet, and since the invention of TV and film, how many franchises have lasted for longer than 60, 50 years? Like, there's nothing. Nothing has lasted that long. Star Wars is the outliner, but everything has its time. And I believe Star Wars has had its time. And you can probably see that from the diminishing viewing figures on Disney+. You'll probably see that with the next film. There's a huge divide that started with The Last Jedi and currently is continuing to saturate the fans. And this is why we're having conversations like this, because this is, quite frankly, more interesting than the stories. Now, many people told me that Andor is an incredible show, and I'm sure it is. It bored me to tears, but that's completely irrelevant. We're not here to talk about Andor. We're not here to talk about actually any of the shows. We're here to talk about the fans. Now, I'm black, I'm a fan. So, do I think Star Wars is inherently racist from the fans' point of view? No, I don't. Because, again, so yeah, weird. But, and that's not to say there's not been some discourse when it comes to characters of color appearing in Star Wars. There was a lot of backlash for John Boyega when he first appeared in the trailer for Force Awakens. We cannot deny that did happen. That absolutely did happen. But that's not all the fans. And I think this is where John Boyega has hit a boulder, not even a rock, he's hit a boulder. Because if you look at the majority of fans, they're not racist. They are actually completely colorblind when it comes to Star Wars. They have characters that are different genders, different species, different colors, just everything. Every kind of character has appeared in Star Wars. And there's not been any backlash. And a lot of these characters are fan favorites. So I completely debunk the idea that Star Wars fans are racist. This doesn't come down to racism for me. This comes down to corporate greed. Now I can sit here and I can name all the characters of color there's been over the many years, and the many actors there's been in Star Wars as well. And I can start as far back as Billy D. Williams. I can come as far as Childish Gambino or Donald Glover. I can mention Samuel Jackson. I can mention Kelly Tran. I can mention whoever the hell I like, really, because there's been so many characters of color in Star Wars. That's not the issue for me. Now I do think when it comes to the narrative, and I do, maybe I'm wrong here, and you can let me know if you think I'm wrong, but I do think there is a bit of an issue still when it comes to, for example, if Finn was to get with Rey, and if they had become a couple in the recent trilogy, I think there would have been some backlash to that, and I think that would have been a race thing. Now, I could be completely wrong, but I do think there would have been a bit of backlash. Now, if John Boyega is referring to that, I'm on board with him. I think some fans would have found that a little bit too much for them to handle. Just saying. But I do not agree with him in terms of him saying the whole fan base is racist. It's simply not true at all. It really is not true. So when it comes to a conversation as such, I like nuance and I like subtlety. And I believe that you should look at both sides of the argument. I try and look at both sides of the argument before I make my final judgment here. And I have to say, I completely disagree that the fans are racist, but I do think the corporate world, whether it be Disney or Paramount or whatever, there's still this sense of discrimination. But I don't even think it's discrimination, because ultimately, if black characters in their mind were selling the film, they would make as much money as they possibly could. So they wouldn't care about the racism thing. They're just thinking about it from the lens of where the film is going to sell, which is smart on a business level, but on a more human level is completely disgusting. And you have to remember that John Boyega has gone through 3 Star Wars films which have been routinely destroyed by Star Wars fans and by corporate greed, and also by Rian Johnson. Sorry, Rian, I think you're actually very talented, but that film was absolute trash. So I can see where he's coming from. He's been berated, barraged, and absolutely destroyed by fans, by critics, by box office figures. Actually, the box offices weren't that bad for the films, so ignore that. But just imagine having almost 10 years of people bashing your films. And now, obviously, his career is not doing as well as it was back then. For whatever reason, I don't know why that is. But I do know, just from personal experience of being on YouTube and being on Instagram, that when you are consistently abused, not racially, but just consistently abused, maybe for the film, maybe for your performance, maybe just in general, you and your cast members have been consistently abused, it's not a good feeling. It's definitely not a good feeling. And he's probably taken that energy and mixed it with the energy of racism. And he's probably seen things that people wrote, and they did write stuff. Like, we can't sit here and say people did not write stuff. They did, on the first trailer, write a lot of racist comments. He's probably taken everything on kind of a surface level, and he's probably actually worded things in the incorrect manner, which is a real shame, because I know he was a massive fan favorite. And that's not just from people who are black, that's from people who are white, from brown, whatever color, whatever creed. He was completely loved by every Star Wars fan, pretty much. And they all wanted Finn to become either a Jedi or become a very significant character. It's kudos to John Boyega that he got the fans on his side through his performances. But I think now he may have put his foot again in the proverbial shit. But forget about my thoughts. What do you guys think? Do you think I'm right? Do you think there's a bit of a more nuanced argument to be had here? Do you think that John Boyega's thoughts are completely correct? Do you think that the fan base are racist? Or do you think, like me, this is more of a corporate issue than a fan issue? I would like to know your thoughts in the comments. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say on this matter. Let's talk in the comments. Let's start a conversation, guys. Big love, and I'll speak to you soon.